what's up, it's Brian here, and this video is the 7th video in the 10-part series on racism that I'm doing. So this video is specifically about fighting racism in people out there on an individual level. And no, this is kind of like a guideline, I believe a general framework on how everyone can ideally talk to people that are racist or have biases or are closed-minded and try to get them into a less racist space. And note that my next video, I'm going to specifically be talking to racist people out there and being like, trying to communicate in a way to get them to be less racist. So very similar ideas as this video, but the angle is different. Who I'm talking to is different. And no, I just want to say a lot of random deep thoughts came to my head when prepping for this video. So it might seem disjointed a bit at different parts, but just take it all in. I mean, I could have easily separated this video into like 4 or 5 videos. I think most YouTubers would do that. I'm going to go over a lot of content right now. But my thinking is I'm already breaking this down into a 10-part video series. I don't want to break it down anymore. And no, to frame the whole conversation that I'm going to have, I just want to talk about what I'm seeing right now that is unproductive. So the first thing that I'm seeing is the emphasis on being anti-racist or not a racist. Now, individually, like your own self-reflection, you can view yourself that way. But I'm talking about when you're communicating to people how to be. And the reason that that's troublesome is because you're just saying not a negative, right? You're framing it from what you don't want. And my background in positive psychology is just who I am as a person. I always frame things on what I want. So you can't say the opposite of racism is anti-racism because you're just using the word. It's like not racism. No, the opposite of racism is open-mindedness, I believe. So I just believe in communicating to people, whoever. If you're on TV and you're talking, if you're talking with friends in your inner circle, say things like, let's try to be as open-minded as possible. Don't say, let's try to be anti-racist, because it's just a different framing to it. And I believe language matters when it comes to stuff like this. And the next thing that I see a lot of, especially on social media, like on LinkedIn, I've seen this, is people just shaming people who may be racist, may have biases, may say a racist comment, may say a generalization or that sort of thing. And look, I'm not saying you can't do that, but you can't shame someone and like ignore them and say you're racist and then stop the conversation and then at the same time say you care about reducing racism in the world. You don't, because in that scenario, you're presented with a specific opportunity to engage with someone to reduce their racist behaviors and you back down. So it's like if you really want to reduce the racism in the world, you got to engage with people, have dialogue on it. And look, I'm not saying like every single person in your life who's a racist, you got to sit down with them. But if the opportunity presents itself, and maybe it's someone close to you or someone you're talking with online, engage with them. Try to see where they're coming from and then get them to a less racist space. Because if you don't, then you're pretty much just leading to the racism being hidden. Right? And it's like, is that the goal? Is the goal for just racism to be hidden and for people not to show it? I don't think that's a goal, because then racism still exists psychologically. And guess what? These people who are racist, they probably have kids. It's going to be passed down generations. Right? I've even heard a comment or two online, well, if they're old and they're racist, it's not a big deal. I was like, who do you think they hang around? I mean, everyone has an inner circle. Everyone communicates with people. So like there's ripple effects of every racist attitude and every open-minded attitude. So you have to keep that in mind. Really step up to the plate if you truly care about reducing racism in the world. And entertainers and celebrities, they may call out someone who says a racist comment, that sort of thing. I'm okay with that. But I just think you can't stop there all the time. I'm not saying everyone needs to go further with it, but if you're like friends with a celebrity or, you have a way to talk with them, their inner circle, you got to step up to the plate and have those open-minded conversations. It might be behind closed doors, people might not know about it, but you got to have those conversations with people around you for sure. And this just leads me to the main point of the whole video, which is if you're concerned with reducing the racism in individuals out there and the people around you, you have to first understand their thinking and where they're coming from. So you may be thinking, Brian, you're saying to understand the racist? And yes, actually, that's exactly what I'm saying, because people do not change if they feel like they're not being heard. And you can magnify this idea to all areas of life and just listen to everyone, because that would solve a lot of the issues in the world, I believe. And look, I'm not perfect with this. I mean, my understanding abilities, particularly to racists out there that are hidden and maybe they disguise it as kindness, can improve. And I want to frame this whole thing too on the importance of it and make some correlations to other areas of life. So I'm an informal coach right now, case manager to youth at foster care. I've worked in alternative high schools. Pretty much my whole part-time job, full-time job career has been working with people going through challenges. And I know that the number one thing is to listen to people, to understand them. That comes first. It's called restorative discipline. For any quote unquote bad mindset or bad behavior, you got to start there. You really do. And this is not about condoning their behavior at all. It's about recognizing that their perspective is their perspective, and you have to understand that it's not from your point of view, it's from their point of view, and it's not about you. So stop making it about you. So a lot of people in the racism conversation, they make it about them. They try to look self-righteous, and that doesn't help the issue in the least. And again, this applies to other areas of life too: parenting, a prison setting, school setting, relationships. So I'm going to show a few examples right now. So it's like, if you're a parent out there, you know you can't just tell your child not to do something, or a teacher can't just tell a student not to do something. Because guess what? When you're not around, they're still going to do it if mentally they don't see the purpose behind the reason for change, right? So keep that in mind. Same thing with racism. Don't just tell someone not be racist. That doesn't do anything. That doesn't solve anything. And anyone who knows anything about psychology knows that, or especially if you're a parent. Also, in a relationship, this idea applies too. So say your partner was rude to you one night after getting home, just had a negative attitude. So like, what is the point of blowing up at them? That would definitely be the easy thing to do for your ego, right? That would feel good, but that doesn't solve the issue. You gotta understand where someone is coming from, find out the reasons why they did what they did, get into their headspace so that you can help them get into a more positive mental headspace. And this is like tied to everything too. Prison setting. If someone murders someone or robs someone, they gotta see what they did. And you gotta find that out first before trying to help them get into a more positive mental space. And you gotta separate too, reasons from excuses. People do not have any excuse to be racist, but reasons are different. You always have reasons for whatever you do, right? So like talking to someone in prison, say, if you kind of dig deep, figuring out the reasons in a, again, non-judgment zone, you may figure out, they might just say, well, I wasn't thinking about it, so my emotions got the best of me. That might not sound like a reason, but that's still a reason. So you really gotta dig deep into that in regards to conversations with people that have biases, that maybe have racist tendencies out there. And again, I'm not saying you need to communicate this way to every person who's a racist out there, but if you care about reducing racism in individuals out there, this is the way to do it. You gotta start from understanding that person, get in their mental head. Because you have to understand too that hurt people. And if you want to stop that hurt, you got to figure out where the hurt is at. And understanding them is the first step. So now I want to go over a practical example that may come up when you're talking to a racist. So when you're digging deep into the biases that someone has, I think a lot of the time it just comes from personal experiences that they had. So they might frame it as, oh, this is just my experience. This is my truth. So my reasons for being biased or being racist are valid because of that. But you have to understand that a singular experience, that's just confirmation bias if you then paint the whole group or race as that thing. And people too, they may say they're better than a race because of whatever reason, or because statistics may back up a certain claim, or they might just say that a race is disproportionately a certain thing, or they commit more crime, or they're just terrible people. But this whole idea, you have to flip the generalization that they're making on the race on them. And you can say something like, so what could someone say about your race being disproportionately XYZ negative thing, and how would you like it if someone saw you and inferred that about you? So then from that whole conversation, then it's like, why be a hypocrite? So I think that's really important to get to that standpoint where they see they're literally being a hypocrite. They don't like being judged, but they're judging other people. And again, this is just one little example. Like, this 5-minute conversation is not going to foster enough change to change someone from a racist to being an open-minded person. But it can start the process, and it's one example. And it's pretty much like this whole thing too. People just think that their reasons are valid, but you need to really be specific on their reasons too. So meaning, I think a lot of times people might just not like a specific behavior that someone is doing, and they might notice the skin color of that person and then kind of group people from there. So say they see a group of people robbing a store, or they see a group of people just not caring about the murder of a specific race or that sort of thing. So like, you can have a negative opinion of the people that are doing that, But you have to understand that is not a race. And I think communicating that to races is the number one thing. And this ties to my second video I did in the series on color blindness and how that would honestly solve a lot of the problems and eliminate the racism in people. So it's like people too, they might not hate all black people or all white people, but they may say a comment that infers that. So this ties to the idea too, that I believe a lot of the time people are not racist to the core. Even if they present it that way, you gotta really put in the work to find that good in them and show them like their actions and their words coming out of their mouth are not matching the good in them. It's not in alignment with that. So I think poor articulation a lot of the time can be an issue. So like say if you don't like the people robbing the store, say just like I dislike the type of person that would rob a store. They're mean-spirited. Or say like, I don't like the person that doesn't value XYZ important issue that is negatively affecting my community. Or more specific, like, that is not really even changing their opinion. It's just changing how they view their thoughts and being more clear with it. So I think that's really important. And you can really take this whole idea to heart because a lot of times people, they just shame people when they say something. But if you dig deeper, you might get them to change how they're viewing their thoughts, get them to a more positive space. Like that's still a problem, but it's solvable. Like I don't think racism is that severe of a thing that it's impossible to overcome as an individual. Like I don't think it's like being lazy or not intelligent or being a narcissist. Like I think those things take a lot more work to solve. But I think over a certain amount of time, I think you can change someone from being closed-minded to open-minded. I believe you can get it done. You just have to be willing to put in the work. And you have to understand too that no racist is the same. Though there is some overlap in how they got to being racist a lot of the time, everyone has different experiences. So you don't want to generalize the races too. And keep that in mind as you're trying to have this open-minded dialogue with maybe closed-minded people in your life. So as you're trying to understand the races out there, you want to keep in mind this 8-step change process that I created while I was prepping for this video actually in the last couple of days. So I think it's a very valuable tool. And there's 2 deep questions that I came up with that you want to ask yourself. Number 1, how does a person change just in general? Then number 2, how does a person change from someone like yourself talking to them or trying to influence them? I think that right there is the question on how we as people are going to reduce the racism in individuals out there. I think that is the question. That's a deep philosophical question in my opinion. It's an inverse of that first question. And then, so how does a person change in general? I broke it down into 8 different steps. So number 1, they have to just self-reflect on life and their areas of improvement. Number 2, they have to want to be the best version of themselves. Number 3, they have to have a growth mindset on things. Number 4, they can't be attached to being right with things. Number 5, they have to remove their ego. And then number 6, they have to appreciate diversity of perspectives out there, which will lead to number 7, listen to other people, which then goes to number 8, which is kind of like a repeat of the cycle. They go back to self-reflection, growing, changing their mindset. So this process is really important when you're trying to understand someone and get them to change their mental space. And I'm going to go over the steps really briefly right now in regards to like how you can understand someone and kind of lead someone through this thought process. So number 1, self-reflect on life and areas of improvement. So for this one in particular, honestly, it's very difficult to get another person to get to this stage. Like they ultimately have to just take a leap to self-reflect. And you can just challenge them. Like challenge someone that you know to participate in this step. Ask them questions like, do they know themselves? What is the meaning of life? What turned them into the person they are right now? So this will uncover like some of the biases someone has, the reasons why they are racist. And another question too with this is, do they love themselves? So you got to keep in mind that, and also what I discussed in the self-love video that I did. Look, if you don't love yourself, even if you have love from other people, I still call that symbolic suicide. Why? Because from your own standpoint, it's like, what's the point of getting better? Why should I even care how I turn out, right? Because I don't even love myself. That's a very serious thing. I call it symbolic suicide because it's the death of your best self. So I said before that self-love is the root of life pretty much. This is why. It's heavily tied in with racism as well. Because once a racist loves themselves and they value their life, then they're going to be concerned with being the best version of themselves. And that leads to the second step of change. So the second step, of course, be the best version of yourself. And a part of that too, when you're having this dialogue with racists, is just avoiding faulty logic, unproductive thinking, and unauthentic thinking. So just like lead someone through this conversation. Like, how do they define faulty thinking, unproductive thinking, and unauthentic thinking? And they might understand from all this that they want to manifest positive thinking, which again is then growing your thinking, having a growth mindset, which is the third step of change, viewing mistakes as a learning opportunity. And with this too, you can use some examples from someone's career, from sports, from working out, or just with thinking. Like really get someone to understand that you improve your thinking by having less optimal thinking by definition. So be okay with that. Like you seeing your faulty logic is a good thing because then you can correct it. That's how people improve their thinking. And it's very, very important to understand this because guess what? This is the literal opposite of shame. Like that's how backwards a lot of the conversations are in terms of when you shame a racist, when you ignore a racist, when you say you are not a racist and you scream at them and like all this unproductive thing of shaming people. It's like that's literally the opposite of what you need to do because you're encouraging the racist to not have a growth mindset. You're telling them you can't change, you're just like that. You know, I would love to see the correlation between being a racist and having a fixed mindset. I think it's pretty high. So you really need to encourage people to have a growth mindset. Like it's okay that your thoughts are the way they are because you can change them. I think we have to encourage people to have that mentality. And then that leads to not being so concerned about being right and being more concerned with the truth. So you're not being attached to your thinking. So you need to recognize that your growth mindset leads to you not being attached to your thinking. And then it's like you can just have this dialogue with someone who is racist or just has biases. Why live a fake life, right? Why be perceived outwardly by the world like that? So like it's not about being right, it's about being in alignment with your truth. So you really need to get someone to understand that. And then from there, it's like once you're trying to grow and grow and grow and you're not attached to the thinking that you had previously, then that leads to step 5, which is removing your ego. So you need that to happen. And someone just needs to understand that the death of the weaker version of you is required for the best version of you to manifest. So like by definition, your ego will have to be removed anyway because you're dying and dying and dying as you're self-creating yourself. So like that's kind of deep, but like people gotta get deep psychologically if you're trying to disrupt a racist mentality. And it's almost like taking the thoughts in your head, right? Placing them on the table and evaluating them. You know, you can do this through meditation, a lot of self-reflection too. Like you are not your thoughts. You have to really ingrain that into a racist head or someone who has biases, because then they can change their thoughts. Their identity is not their thoughts. So all of that is really important. I mean, those 5 steps there, like self-reflect, wanting to be the best version of yourself, having a growth mindset, not being attached to being right, removing your ego. Then it's like, so you're open to new thoughts from all that. Then you can go to the 6th step of change, which is appreciating the diversity of perspectives out there. You have to recognize that your truth can be shaped by other people's truth out there. That's really important. You have to motivate a racist to seek out other perspectives. Because everyone has unique thinking. And like people, everyone, racist or not, you gotta get to the point where like other people's thoughts need to be embraced. Not like they're a battle against your own, but they can help you reshape your own to have more authentic thinking. I think that's really important. And also, you also have to decipher who to listen to. That's really important, and when to stop listening to them. But that's a conversation for probably another video. So like once you're appreciating other perspectives, then you're in the right mindset to listen to other people and take it all in and then self-reflect, and then the change can really manifest, I think, from there. So again, this is a complex process. I went through it very, very quickly, but obviously it'll be more of a drawn out conversation with people in your life that maybe are biased. And note that this will not work for everyone. I mean, it's not 100% of the time going to result in changing a racist to being an open-minded person. Everyone is different. There will always be some racists out there that are kind of racist to the core and really committed to that thinking. But I think a lot of people present themselves as racist, but they can really change to become a better person. So all that I talked about there, that's all from an individual to an individual, person to person. So no, I believe that is the most important way to reduce the racism in a person. But I do want to touch on this. A group or a sector of society can impact individual racism also. So the few areas that I'm going to go into are media, workplace, and school. Very briefly. So in an ideal world, the media would unite people and the division and really model open-minded, constructive dialogue. But honestly, at this point, I have very little faith in mainstream media or social media or just what's popular on YouTube. Because I see a lot of like, don't be racist or shaming people, which again is unproductive to understanding perspectives and changing the psychology of people. And on TV too, when people have discussions a lot of the times, it's for views, it's for money. So it's like two people are literally talking over one another. So if they're not understanding on TV, how are they going to encourage you to understand one another? So that's very discouraging. Or it's like if people are listening to others, sometimes they're like walking on eggshells, afraid to say the wrong thing, which again doesn't really go deep into someone's psychology. That's not a safe space to foster real change. And the workplace now I want to go into. So right now there's some diversity trainings out there, racial sensitivity trainings, unconscious bias trainings, and I've participated in a couple of these myself. And from what I've gathered, they don't really seem to be doing much. There's worthwhile aspects to the trainings, of course, like all trainings, but in general, they seem to come across too condescending, negative, and also specific. So what I mean by that specific is on an individual level, you can get really deep, I believe, in terms of like fostering the development of a racist out there to not be racist. Because people, are more vulnerable with individuals out there. But in a workplace setting, you could say it's as safe space and non-judgment zone as you possibly can, but it's not. People don't feel comfortable really going too deep with it. So I believe to tackle racial issues, sometimes you gotta go about it, sometimes in an indirect way. So I'm gonna advocate for an open-mindedness training. And this would tackle not just racism, but sexism and everything that is tied to open-mindedness. It's almost like killing several birds with one stone, so to speak. This would be so valuable. And you could also incorporate the actual work that the company does in this training. You can go through the 8-step process of change and then tie in like the impact or decision making of the company and the work that they do. So it's not just a theoretical thing tied to racism. So that would really lead to a lot of open-minded dialogue, hopefully, because an open-minded way of doing everything is positive, pretty much. And for schools, so schools do play a role in instilling open-mindedness and fighting racism, but it's not in some of the discussions that I'm seeing on TV in terms of like instilling critical race theory and that sort of thing in schools. I don't think it's that. I think it's mainly just showing students the diversity of the world, getting them to expose to a lot of different things, open-minded dialogue from there. And again, a lot of schools are already doing this, but you just want to magnify it, I think, to an even higher level. And of course, this will tackle a lot more reduction of racism in individuals because you're targeting it at an early age with children, right? So a lot of children, they're not really racist. Like racism is a learned behavior. So if you can target it in schools, not racism specifically, but open-mindedness, which would lead to someone not being racist, that would be a really critical thing. And no, I'm gonna go much deeper into education in another video, probably in the next like 6 to 8 months on education reform too, where I'm gonna go deeper into this and a lot more other things tied to positive psychology and life skills for school reform. And all the stuff I talked about, keep this final thing in mind. You have to model this. So the 5th video I believe that I did was check your own racism, right? And the 2nd video was like be colorblind on the world. Like you do those things, that will naturally get people around you to be less racist, to be less closed-minded. It's like, look, for you, like I said in that 5th video, don't shame yourself, because you need to understand that in order to grow, you have to learn through your mistakes. You have to have a growth mindset to become more open-minded. So you have to make that correlation to other people too that are racist. In order to understand that they have to have a growth mindset, you have to enable them to understand their thought process to then change their thought process. And that starts with hearing them out, with understanding them, not shaming them, because that doesn't do anything but hide the racism. And if you're concerned with reducing the racism and fighting racism in the world, don't be a coward and step down when the time comes to engage with the racists out there. You gotta step up to the plate, because that's gonna reduce the racism in the world. Subscribe if you vibe.